think like Intune and Windows 365, things like that. So I'm just going to give you a brief recap of some of the announcements that we had at Ignite, and hopefully we can answer any questions that you might have around that. So let me pull this up and I'll share my screen. We actually, I'll kind of throw this out. We actually did a similar presentation um, at Endpoint Office Hours, which is similar to this, where we have a crew of customers who come in that are sysadmins that really focus on that endpoint management space and security. And so we delivered this last week, right before Thanksgiving. So we'll just kind of run through it again. And if this is new for you, awesome. If not, maybe we can get some questions answered. All right, so Ignite was huge, right? And I'm going to do my very best to not say the word Copilot. It was just really hard to avoid the Copilot word at Ignite because it was Copilot everything. But from here on out, I'm going to do my very best to not say the word Copilot and really focus on things that are related into the endpoint management space. So before I get started, also know that last week we did have a service release of Microsoft Intune 23.11. Some good stuff in there, including management of Linux subsystem for Windows. So if you asked about that before, I've had a lot of HiED customers looking to manage that. We now have some limited management capabilities inside of Intune. We also have improvements to MDE for macOS and Linux, and being able to manage MDE on those platforms through the settings catalog and things like that. And we also have some improvements to the Windows firewall configuration profile changes. So check that out. That should all be live in your tenants now, and that these links will get them to you so that you can go kind of review that further if you wish. But as far as what was announced at Ignite, we had published a couple of blogs prior to Ignite, really focusing on macOS management. So that was a common theme that we saw at Ignite this past couple of weeks ago, was just the emphasis that the Microsoft engineering teams are putting onto macOS and making that a first-class citizen within Intune. So you'll hear a lot about things like DDM support, being able to do platform SSO for macOS devices, which is where we can actually sign into macOS with Entra ID accounts, being able to manage those software updates a lot more seamlessly, and better like complex PKG support and things like that. So again, when we think about macOS within Intune, it was fairly limited, but the past 6 months, the engineering teams have done a lot of great work. So that was one common thing that we heard. And then the second thing was all of the news around the Intune Suite. If you're not familiar with the Intune Suite is a new set of premium features within Intune. We brought this to market really in March of this past year, where we had some limited capabilities with like remote help, advanced endpoint analytics, and I think Tunnel AM as well. And these are all solutions that are available to you today. In fact, remote help is free for education customers. So if you're not familiar with that, you can actually go into your Intune console and enable remote help from the tenant administration blade and get that turned on and be able to use that for all of your devices. We do have cross-plat support now for that. So we've got macOS in preview to be able to do that, and then even Android device in preview as well. So really excited that is free for education customers again, so you don't have to pay for it. Everything else inside the Intune suite, there is a cost associated to it. But the three big ones that I think we've heard from customers expressing interest in the Intune suite is the enterprise app management, which is where we will be able to do third-party patch management for applications. Cloud-based PKI, which is essentially doing a certificate authority in the cloud, and being able to push those certificates directly through Intune. We don't need any on-prem resources to do that. And then improvements to the advanced endpoint analytics. So I'll kind of review these three really quick, and then I've got some other tidbits to share. So let's see if I can progress forward here. Let's start with advanced endpoint analytics. We will go GA in February of 2024, and there are two big features that have been announced. Number one is a device query capability. This is equivalent to CM Pivot in Configuration Manager. So being able to, in real time, query devices through Intune with KQL and get results directly back from that. So, right, querying software status or hardware inventory, how many devices have this application installed, etc. You can do those types of those queries. We'll also have a new battery health report. We've got a couple of images here that kind of showcase the capabilities around this. I see Alex's comments. So many questions around Cloud PKI. I will do my best to answer those. The battery health report is just going to give us some really rich intelligence around these devices. This one here is actually an application crash view. So if you are leveraging advanced endpoint analytics today, we've done some improvements to the application crashes as well, and giving you some rich visibility into kind of the current state of those devices. And help you correlate those common themes across devices and what's going on, so you can kind of be a little more proactive in your troubleshooting versus reactive. This is the image I was hoping to show you. If you are familiar with CM Pivot today in Configuration Manager, we will now have. I keep wanting to call it Intune Pivot. That's not what we're going to call it. It's called Device Query, but I think Intune Pivot's a cooler name. I'm just not Microsoft marketing. But you'll notice here that I'm actually in a desktop. So I've clicked into a device, and then on the bottom of the screen there in the navigation plate, you'll see device query. And then you'll notice that you have a pane where you can go in and type your own queries to get information about these devices. Again, this is, I think, going to be limited at a device like individual device basis at launch. Again, this will be available in February 2024, but using natural KQL, you can run those queries as you need. So we're really excited about that. And then here you go. Here's the battery health new reports. Again, you'll notice that with advanced endpoint analytics, we have some new capabilities around like being able to do device scopes. So if you're using endpoint analytics today, I kind of think about it in a P1, P2 type format. And endpoint analytics is available to all Intune customers today, kind of that Intune core piece. But with advanced endpoint analytics, you get some richer features. And one of those that you can see in the screen is the device scope. So you're actually able to scope these reports and get richer intelligence based on a subset of devices instead of the entire estate. So again, the battery health reports will be really nice to have so that we can stay current on those devices and make sure that we're keeping them in tip-top shape. All right. The next one is Microsoft Intune Enterprise App Management. So this is a first-party solution for patching third-party applications directly with Intune. If you are an Intune administrator, you know the pain of going out and updating those applications. So when you are aware that there's a updated application that you've deployed out, what do you have to go do? You got to go find that app, download it, package it up, mostly in a Win32 format is what we typically recommend. Then you got to go build that up from scratch again, right? Get those install properties, test it, make sure it works, and then do an actual upgrade. So right, if you're gonna replace that application, you're gonna do a supersedence rule and things like that. What we aim to do is to streamline this in a much more simplistic fashion. So what we'll do is we will have a curated catalog of third-party apps that we find in your environment, and we will publish them to this catalog. And as these new updates become available, you will just go to add a new app like you're used to doing, but you'll see a new dropdown for a catalog app. You'll click that link. You'll select the app that you wish. You'll be able to choose the architecture and language and things like that. And then it's like a next wizard, right? You just go in, we pre-populate the install commands for you. We pre-populate the description, the version number, all of that good stuff, and we are building the rules around the detection method for you, so you don't have to go do any of that. I haven't seen it this simple. It's pretty exciting to see what we're doing. Yep, here's a screenshot of it. So again, if you just click add an app, you'll be able to see this curated list of apps. You just select the one you want, and then you can push it out. The other thing is that we'll create a new view. So if you go into your apps blade inside of Intune, you'll see at the very bottom, there's an update for Windows catalog apps, and you will see all of the apps that need to be updated. So we're actually bringing that to your attention so you can go then take action on it. Instead of the security teams letting the Intune admins know that, hey, there's an update, you need to go do that. Again, that will also be available in February of 2024. They are not going to go into public preview of this. It's in private preview today. It's going to go straight to GA February 2024. At first release, the set of apps that are going to be there are going to be kind of small. So I want to set that stage a little bit that if you look at it, you're not going to see your entire app estate in there immediately on day one. It's going to take us a little bit of time to kind of build this out, but the big ones should be there. So I don't have a number to give you or anything like that, but I anticipate the big ones, big vendors and ISVs being in there. But that's going to continue to grow over the next year, I would say. And the engineering team has a true commitment to ensuring that that's a great experience for everyone. All right, the last piece, again, that is coming in February 2024 is the Cloud PKI. So this is a Microsoft Managed Certificate Authority in the cloud. We'll be able to deploy those certificates to Windows, iOS, macOS, and Android. Essentially, we're going to remove the need for an on-prem CA. Maybe not entirely, but in certain circumstances, right, you can actually create a new certificate and deploy that out without doing that from an on-prem CA that you have today. Well, I'm not saying that this is going to deprecate your on-prem CA. You're still going to have other workloads that are dependent on it, but maybe not for your Intune managed devices. So if you've done certificate deployment within Intune today, we've had the ability to deploy certificates like SCEP profiles and things like that. It's difficult in some instances, right? Because we are still relying on that on-prem solution. So we even though we've had the ability to deliver certificates through Intune, we haven't had a seamless experience. And so if you're used to this, and by the way, I hate certificates. It's like the bane of my existence. I don't care to know them very well because I just hate them so much. But you're familiar with probably like Indes servers, creating that certificate connector within Intune and deploying an app proxy or reverse app proxy to be able to get those certificates delivered into Intune. We are simplifying that architecture with this solution. And I have a little architecture diagram to show you to hopefully allow you to make it a little more sense of this. But it's just going to simplify certificate deployment all up. Again, it's only one piece of the pie when we think about certificates and the way that we authenticate, but hopefully this will make sense in just a moment. So this is kind of your traditional architecture around, like this is enterprise wireless architecture. And you can see over here, and let's see if I can do this. This section right here is what we are simplifying with the Cloud PKI service itself. So again, today, if you want to deploy that certificate, you have to have your certificate of authority on-prem. You've got to stand up an Indes server and then those Azure App Proxy or Web App Proxies to be able to talk, Intune, be able to talk to your CA and vice versa, so we can have that consistent flow going. This is the component that Cloud PKI is actually going to simplify so that we don't have a dependency or a reliance on on-prem. Let me show you kind of what this looks like from the Intune portal. So inside of Intune, you'll be able to go and create a certificate authority. You'll be able to define a consistent issuing CA, root CA. You can choose the validity, etc. Look at this. You fill this out as you need. like you would typically do when you create a certificate and certificate authority. Click next. And then we've got our issuing cert. We just download that, and it's automatically ingested inside of Intune, so we can deploy it out like a typical certificate, right? So we can deploy this out to users or devices as needed. So again, once those are in there, those certs are, we've got some rich telemetry around, are these active, expired, etc. And then issuers, all of that information we have available directly within the console for you, so you're able to manage. So I know that that's a very brief overview. This is pretty much all we can share at this point. This past week, we had technical takeoff with the Microsoft Intune team, and they did, I think, another deep dive on the cloud PKI solution itself. So if you want to go learn a little bit more, I'll post a link in the chat. We'll have there are so many questions around the solution. I still have a bunch of questions on how this is going to fully work. I've not had a chance to demo this myself or play around with it. So a lot of the customer conversations that I've been having, there's a lot of questions, and I don't have all of the answers yet. But come February 2024, we should be able to answer most of those questions for you. So I know the chat is lighting up. And I will definitely do my best to answer those. But again, this is all will be made available February 2024, and this is part of the Intune Suite bundle. So with that, we had a few announcements around Windows 365. If anyone is using Windows 365 today, we announced some new AI capabilities around Windows 365 around resizing of VMs. Which is nice, so that if you deploy those VMs out there, you'll actually be alerted like, hey, these users have these particular SKUs assigned to them. They may not be using all those resources. Y'all could actually scale that back down and save you a little bit of cost. Or hey, these users are consistently maxing out their CPUs. They might benefit from a higher tier SKU, so that you can give them what they need. So we've got some cool support coming there. We also have a new Windows app, which is really exciting, through the Microsoft Store. This is it's kind of weird, but it is a Windows app itself. So you're actually able to access all of your cloud PCs or Azure Virtual Desktops through one application. And in some cases, we're actually bringing RDS support to this as well. So a new single unified app to access all of your virtualized desktops is really exciting. And then we also went GA with our single sign-on capabilities with Entra ID. The other two big ones, which is in particular, I think, exciting for higher education, is we now have a GPU public preview. So there's a form that you can go fill out if you are interested in the GPU SKUs available for Windows 365. We're really excited to announce that we now have GPU support. There's only 3 SKUs out there. And there is a wait list that you have to get on to try this out, but we are bringing support for this, which has traditionally only been available in AVD. And then we also announced just before Ignite a new 16 vCPU SKU for Windows 365. So if you think about researchers and developers and folks like that in your schools, etc., that's a really welcome change. So with that, I think we had a couple of other announcements that I just wanted to call to your attention around Universal Print. Universal Print, if you're not familiar with it, this is a solution that is built into your licensing with A3 and A5. The Universal Print Cloud service has a couple of big updates around this, and they actually have always been limitations that have kind of shied customers away from it. But number one is cross-plat support. So we actually now have universal print support for Mac OS. Again, kind of in theme with the doubling down on Mac OS management as a first-class citizen within Intune. You'll now be able to print literally from anywhere, which is really exciting. And then we also now have some updates to Follow Me printing and secure printing. So we're able to go and if the printer supports Follow Me printing, that's where you can actually get a QR code and scan that QR code to release that print. And then the other one is I think that's in the case of if you print, you can choose, a dedicated printer, then go use a QR code and retrieve your print. And then we also have secure print, whereas we are able to print a job not to a specified printer, but to the service, and then I can go log in with a code to any printer and retrieve that job. So lots of good, actually, quote unquote, universal printing capabilities now available, and rolling out to tenants. So that is.
We had a question in the
Yeah.
chat. Does that work with Macs?
Yeah. Yep.
Because it's not the printer level, correct?
Right.
So
that's my understanding, at least. I'd like to get some feedback, but yeah, my understanding is that we support this with macOS as well.
So for those folks that don't know what universal print is basically the idea is that you don't have to have print servers on-prem. Your printers are secure. You can have MFA for printing capabilities, sensitive documentation. It's truly the greatest thing. If you've been an IT person for a very long time, print servers are one of those horrible processes you just have to deal with. That eliminates this process, does much more secure printing. Really, really cool technology.
Yeah, we're excited about it. So that's pretty much all I had to share. It was a big ignite for us. I guess the other thing, and Scott, maybe y'all have already talked about it. Now I reserve the right to say the word Copilot. But Security Copilot, if you didn't see those demos, we are doing an embedding of that into Intune. So we'll have a dedicated kind of fly out of the Security Copilot within the Intune console itself, which will be really exciting for Intune administrators to be able to leverage that when they need to. So that was outside of the main Intune announcements. That was more on the security side, but it's definitely a significant call out for Intune admins.
There's a question regarding the universal print. The question is integrations. Does it integrate with pay-to-print services like PaperCut?
Not that I'm aware of right now. We actually heard this on Endpoint Office Hours last week too. Was a kind of a request to be able to do like chargebacks to other schools and kind of fit those business models. So it's something we're going to take back to the Universal Print team, because that's not really something I guess we had thought about on our side, or what I've heard from customers. So not today, but hopefully we can work on something.
Thank you.
Can you guys hear me all right?
Yeah.
All right. I had to change headsets, whatever. But there was also quite a few questions around pricing, or at least licensing certain stuff. So like one of the questions was around the Intune suite. It's like $2 a user a month.
Yep.
Or at least the cloud PKI stuff. And it said, hey, what is this licensed per device or per user? And if it's licensed per user, what happens when you start looking at lab machines and such?
Yeah, great question. So the Intune Suite is licensed per user for education. The Intune Suite bundle, which is everything that we've talked about, right? That's inclusive of advanced endpoint analytics, cloud PKI, enterprise app management, MAM, tunnel for MAM. Remote help's already included in education, but generally, like every product that's released within the Intune Suite, it is $2 per user per month for faculty and $1.50 per user per month for student. So it is licensed based on the user, not by the devices. My understanding right now is that there is no dedicated SKU for lab machines or anything like that. It's kind of just licensed for everyone.
Yeah, and we'll also say that the pricing that Garrett gave you is based on MSRP. Please get your actual pricing through your reseller.
Yep, 100%.
And I'll paste this in the chat. It looks like that is part of our partner integration for Universal Print with PaperCut.
Awesome.
Buried down in the documentation quite far.
Good find. That's good to know.
But it is PaperCut software, does that. And it also appears to do BYOD printing, which I was surprised about that. But if that's the case, then we do have a partnership with them, and including in Universal Print.
So there's one other question which I can answer. David Farley asked, what's the Intune pricing for staff, not faculty, not students? We only have two types of pricing. We have students and everybody else who's not a student. So when you're looking at it from that aspect of it, faculty, staff are the same thing from a licensing perspective.
Yep, that next question,
endpoint
privilege management, yes, that's included in the Intune Suite license as well. Some of these capabilities are also available a la carte. So if you just wanted EPM, for example, or you just wanted Cloud PKI, and I don't know if Cloud PKI is going to have that yet. We haven't heard that from business planning yet, but some of them have individual, part numbers so that you could actually purchase those a la carte and not go with the entire suite. But kind of like with A5, when you purchase any two services within the Intune suite a la carte, it just makes sense to get the entire bundle. It's cheaper.
I'm assuming the next question after what Alex wrote, usually staff are bundled under faculty for licensing, employee versus student. I'll answer the next question that's probably on somebody's mind is, what happens if you have a student who's working in the library? Well, if their main function of attending the school is a student, then they are a student, even though they are doing some part-time work there to maybe work down their student debt or something like that. Their main function is a student. They are therefore a student.
Yep, exactly. And the other thing that we've started to see kind of an uptick in is Windows 365 usage for those student workers and having a dedicated cloud PC for those admin tasks that they're using for at work. And then, go back to using their own devices as a student and helping kind of segregate that out a little bit. So it's something to explore as well in your own org, and definitely reach out to any of your TSs. Or account reps, and we can kind of walk through that.
I reposted a question from Alex Barth for visibility regarding PKIs, Cloud PKI.
Okay.
Yeah, move Wi-Fi from username and password to certificates. Yes, so Garrett, Wi-Fi profiles are included in the Intune PKI rollout, correct?
So Wi-Fi profiles themselves are part of Intune Core, right? You're able to deploy those Wi-Fi profiles as needed. What we're not doing with Cloud PKI is doing Cloud Radius, right? If you think about certificate delivery, we're not saying that this is the Cloud Radius service. It's definitely on the engineering team's mind. This is kind of what I alluded to when I said this is part one of a holistic solution, and being able to deliver this as a service. The Cloud PKI is going to help simplify the generation of those certs and deploying those out. But we don't have Cloud Radius functionality. It's not like MPS in the cloud.
Oh yeah, I'm not asking the Radius side of it. The question is machine side of it.
Yeah.
Because all of the GUIs and everything else that's been shows here is the user, Tina Fey. It's like, that's nice. Tina Fey's not logged in. Is the machine going to somehow walk into her certificate store, grab her certificate, and pop onto the network as her to patch itself? Or is the machine going to get its own certificate? And if the machine gets its own certificate, what's the process for getting it to get its own certificate? The idea that everything is user-centric belies the fact that the computer connects first. So
yeah, so what you're talking about is machine
user-centric for off after the person's logged in. That's what we want. We want to know who's logged into the machine. Wi-Fi wants to say that this traffic pattern was mapped back to this user. I don't care what machine they're on. I care about the user. When the feds come calling, hey, this IP did X, we need to know the user, not the machine most of the time. Well, at the end of the day, we need both, but whatever. But then user's not logged in, and the machine needs to patch, and it's only on Wi-Fi, and the only way to auth to Wi-Fi is a certificate. Is Cloud PKI fixing that, or am I keeping my existing PKI to shove certificate PKI and SCEP to get a machine certificate for Wi-Fi, even though I've just paid for Cloud PKI?
Yeah, so my hope is that it's going to help simplify the story a little bit, but I'd actually like to, maybe if you're willing, Alex, maybe we could tie off and I could learn a little bit more and we can kind of dive into it more specifically and get you that answer.
Happily. My email address is in chat.
Perfect. Thanks, sir. I'll reach out.
Yeah, I'll help you with that as well, Garrett.
Yeah, you bet.
Yeah, and obviously
Okay,
anything
so-
that I find out that isn't under NDA, I will definitely be bringing back to this group if Garrett doesn't get it back to you all first.
Well, again, there's still a lot that we don't know around the cloud PKI, even internally. So I just want to make sure before I misguide you and everyone that it is going to actually solve those challenges. But we will get back to you for sure.
Yay, thank you.
Microsoft platform.
There's a question regarding pricing, just to make sure that it's clear. Intune Suite is $2 per month per user for employees and $150 for students. So that's a question.
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Again, that's MSRP pricing. Definitely reach out to your account rep
Yes.
and reseller too.
Okay.
Yes,
That's on top of
MSR.
the A5 license?
It is. It's outside
It
of your
is.
A5 licensing.
Yep. Garrett, I know it's been a long time since this actually came out, but one of the customers that we encountered the other day was talking about seeing the ability to do firmware updates. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, you bet.
I know that's probably not in your current deck, but I'm like, you probably are the best person to know.
Yep. Can you see my screen?
It's
Yep.
there. We go. Yep.
Pulling up. Okay, perfect. So yeah, we actually announced a few weeks ago that it's I guess actually been a couple of months ago now, that we now have support within Intune for feature updates, as quality updates we've already had, but now we have driver updates. And the driver and firmware updates is a slick feature where we can go in, let's create a profile here. You will notice that I have the ability to now manually approve and deploy driver updates and automatically approve recommended driver updates. So we are actually connecting, the OEMs connect up to Windows Update and deploy those new drivers and firmware updates. And what we're able to do is come in and let's do a manual one right now. We can just create this profile and then assign it to a user or device group. This one is actually a manual one here. You'll notice that once we create that, it is constantly searching Windows Update for any drivers or firmware updates that we need to review. I have a green check mark that says, oh, there are no driver updates that are found that you need to deploy out, so you're good to go. You'll also notice that I have one that is for the Surface Laptop 2. So what I did was I created a manual profile and deployed it to a group of Surface Laptop Go and Laptop Go 2 devices. So this is targeting just those devices specifically. You could build this based on models. So if you have your groups based on hardware model, then that's going to be super helpful. You could also use filters within the targeting. So if you build your filters inside of Intune to target the appropriate device models, then that works well as well. But again, with this specific device group, I've got one driver that I need to review. So you'll notice that I pop in here and you'll now see that we've got a driver name, the version, manufacturer, etc., when this driver was released. And now I have the ability to review this and I can manually approve this. And as I approve this, then using the Windows Update for Business deployment service, we are actually able to deliver this driver update automatically to the devices following your update ring properties that you've defined in your update rings. So we can actually do this again, either a manual approval or an automatic approval to ensure that the devices are getting the latest updates that you need. This is inclusive of firmware updates, so you don't necessarily need to rely on those third parties to, like, let's say Dell Command or the HP tools, etc., to be able to get those firmware updates out there. But it is only pulling from Windows Update. So if the OEM has not published that update through Windows Update just yet, it's not going to show up inside the Intune console. My understanding is that most of those firmware updates and driver updates are up there very, very quickly. So we haven't had any customers reporting any issues around this. But this is just a core capability now inside of Intune. There is no need to have Intune Suite to get this functionality. It is built into Intune Core. Everyone should be able to leverage this today.
All right. If there's no other questions, I think we can say, Garrett, thank you very, very much for your presentation. I will be reaching out to you later to get a hold of your deck, if that's okay.
Yeah, you bet.
To make that available to everybody. And at this point, I believe we are going to turn the floor over to Mr. Corey Lee.
I'm sorry. I had a real quick question. I don't know if it's for Garrett, but I was asking about the Microsoft SSO platform version 2.0, whether there was an update on the roadmap. I don't know if I missed that maybe when he was first talking, or maybe that's not.
Is that the platform SSO that you're talking about for macOS?
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
So it's version 2, not version 1. I need version 2. I need the functionality that comes with version 2.
Yeah, I think it's coming early next year. Don't quote me on that. I believe that's coming early next year, but we did an announcement. I'll find the blog and throw it in the chat.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
You bet. Corey, over to you.
I know he's in the chat. Yes, you're on mute.
Infamous being on mute. Well, I hear we're having an awesome day, so hopefully I don't bore anyone or ruin it so far. But I think for the next, we'll call it 23 minutes or so. We'll get the team here up to speed with, if they aren't already, some of the latest and greatest updates around Security Copilot. Also, just get folks aware of, what it is, what it's not, and even walk through a brief demo here to the end. So without further ado, I'll just go ahead and share my screen here and get things kicked off.
We can see.
So, all right. So just jumping right in, Security Copilot, a capability set, which will go into kind of, what it's designed to do and where. But, first start off with, as it was designed, it was focused on powering the security analyst use case, addressing needs around how do we make security analysts faster, smarter, and more efficient. But over time, we've quickly realized that there is a larger, we'll call it landscape, that is tangential to what security analysts do, but also that is relative to the way in which most IT environments operate. Where, in many environments, we have pseudo security analysts who, they may be identity specialists, they may be device specialists, they may be folks who work on different domain areas in the context of security. But, how do we bring those folks together and help them collaborate to do one of three things? One, reduce the time it takes to detect and respond to threats. Two, help with cross-skilling. And three, help address, where possible, using machines, the ability for security teams to be extended with respect to niche skill areas. Some of the things that kind of underpin what we aspire to kind of address, which is a lot more than just technical challenges, is, more intelligent and modern defense. We know that in many cases in the security realm, there you won't just have the use of Microsoft solutions in an environment. There will be lots of tools and solutions in an environment that support various things. But we also know with that comes this notion of how do we manage configuration and hygiene and posture. I think recent stats state somewhere close to about 93% of all security attacks, have some relevant, element of posture or configuration drift. That one day we were good, the next day we weren't, and therefore an opening was available for an attacker to exploit. So we don't see things like that slowing down, but in a space where we know that attacker techniques and tactics will continue to evolve, and that things like the skilling shortage won't necessarily, accelerate in terms of lots of environments getting lots of more humans to man the fort. That there's an opportunity for AI to serve as, helping enable a paradigm shift, and some of that has to do with three main areas. One, what does it mean to have the ability to continuously assess the posture in the context of security risk, or in the context of security investigations, right? Because we know things can change. We need to be able to have the ability to understand what those changes are quickly, where they are, and take action where necessary. But in addition to that, being able to support things like how do we bring to the table niche skill sets and expertise to security professionals that they may not have time to actually go develop themselves. Think things like IoT security, now everyone's talking about AI security, and other more, niche areas that, quite frankly, there's still within the shortage of personnel in terms of in the cybersecurity field, there's, gets even more progressively, we'll call it worse when it comes to some of the niche skill areas. So this notion that we can bring niche skill areas to the table, and support things like expanded skill sets for pre-existing, senior level resources and so forth. And then lastly, just what does it mean to really help streamline productivity and democratize the access to information that can help with instrumenting workflows or improving the way in which security activities are responded to or investigated. With that, I won't go into a lot of detail there, but we do recognize that, this is a space where generative AI can, help with the transformation of security, both in the way in which it supports extensibility and this notion of plugins and things to help with disparate tools being able to connect information across them. So not like, more traditional scenarios that may involve SIMs, but more in kind of a modern context. And then on top of that, the use of natural language. So we know that in the security space, knowing various query languages, like in the Microsoft world, Custo query language can be a challenge. But what does it mean, for folks to be able to use natural language, English, in the context of being able to do security stuff, right? This means that more folks who aren't, we'll call it, very experienced security professionals can still do very experienced security professional stuff, right? And this is where, in comes things like Security Copilot, which at its truest form is a generative AI security tool that's backed by several different capability areas that we'll talk about here shortly, but everything from skills to be able to invoke things like skill sets from malware, reverse engineers, from threat hunters to, tier 3 security analysts from a triage perspective. And at the core of generative AI, and specifically generative AI security, is data that is relevant to the context of security outcomes and objectives, right? So whether this is identity data, device data, data relevant to data security and data compliance in terms of sensitivity, these solutions are powered by the data that it can have access to and support, the reasoning over that data for more actionable insights and outcomes. We'll go into more detail there as we talk about some of the how it's built. But the reality is, Security Copilot, one objective is to improve the response times to security activities and events. We've recognized an increase in dwell times for security events where, attackers may lay dormant in environments for extremely long periods of time, or they may, hide in plain sight, not quite dormant, but just don't have quite the visibility and the signal in the environment in order to actually go and detect that they are there. So one big goal and objective is how do we improve response, right? Speed. Secondly, how we help with finding the needle in the haystack scenarios. This gets closer to things like insider risk. When there's lots of data, lots of stuff going on, how do we cut to the chase, get through that stuff, reduce the noise, and get to the things that matter? And then lastly, once again, how are we cross-skilling, junior professionals and upskilling them as a means to extend the capabilities of the team? You may ask yourself, hey, what's different about Security Copilot? And, can we just take a, public version of ChatGPT and plug it into our SOC and start doing a bunch of stuff? You absolutely can do that. but there are very big differences in regards to what Security Copilot can do and how that's crafted. We do leverage a set of foundational models inside of Security Copilot, one of which being ChatGPT-4 for certain things that it's good at doing. But then for the things that it typically isn't good at doing, which is mostly context around security stuff, is where we have our own foundational models alongside of custom models built on top of Azure, a hyperscale AI infrastructure, complemented by, once again, models that are developed by a Microsoft Security Threat Intelligence team, as well as our digital crimes unit, fronted by threat intelligence. So, we've coalesced and aggregated many of our threat intelligence feeds as a means to kind of power grounding the data that will be reasoned over in the context of what Security Copilot can do. This is where we get into things like hallucinations and how that gets prevented on behalf of what generative AI responses may be provided. And then lastly, fronted by what's referred to as cyber skills and prompt books. So skills being, think Amazon Alexa, hey, I need the reverse hunter, the proactive threat hunter skill set. I need the malware reverse engineer skill set. I need the expert in KQL skill set. Help me go do the thing that I'm trying to do without having to already be an expert in that thing. And then secondly, prompt books, which think of this as in the world of generative AI, when we talk about what does it mean to be good at prompt engineering, meaning how well can you ask good questions to a generative AI solution so that it gives you good responses, and generally speaking, good responses in sequence. This is where this notion of prompt books, which are essentially aggregated prompts that are ideal to be used in certain scenarios to, one, continue investigations, further the insights that are gleaned, but also get to a point where kind of actionable steps can be taken. So, I mentioned this briefly, but once again, threat intelligence underpins a lot of what, is at the core of Security Copilot outside of its AI and machine learning models. And a lot of this has to do with just, can we get very precise on information and can we enrich it so that we can use context in a lot of different ways across the environment to produce, faster insights and increase the response times to things. So, when we bring it all home, Security Copilot, does have, at least it started with three main use cases, being how do we help with posture management, understanding, what types of vulnerabilities in the environment, are they potentially exploitable, what types of attackers can exploit them, and then ultimately, like, how do we remediate them? And this is doing things like vulnerability impact analysis. What would it mean if we were to go impact a certain vulnerability to the environment? If we can learn that faster, then that means we can educate the right people who need to agree to us remediating their vulnerability and ultimately closing gaps faster, right? That's kind of part of the name of the game. Secondly, just, providing, more context to incident responders so they can do what they do best, which is, respond and do so in a faster way through things like guided response. And then lastly, security reporting. So in the world of, hey, we've investigated a thing, we've identified some insights and information. How do we now package this up through different lenses? Maybe we need to produce an executive summary that's going to go to some executive or leadership, or we need to produce some type of technical outbrief that shows pretty graphics and visuals on behalf of what we've investigated, but still maintain things like chain of custody on that information, but also do it expeditiously. When we think about certain types of data that might be used by Security Copilot, for folks that attended Ignite, we announced a number of, we'll call it embedded experiences in regards to Security Copilot, embedded experiences for Purview, embedded experiences for Entra, and so forth. So when you think about kind of how Security Copilot might use different pieces of data, one word, context, right? And why that's relevant is because as we're, taking certain data sets like M365 Defender information and looking at active alerts or incidents that are being generated, this can be more on the proactive side of data that's being exposed to an individual. And oftentimes questions need to be answered about those things that are exposed. Should this be a priority? How severe is this thing really? What's the exposure? What's the blast radius, right? We got an incident, we got an alert, but we need to quickly understand what should we do and should we do something really quickly? here is where, things like the M365 embedded experience comes into play to help folks understand, one, what can they do in context of an incident or alert? What are the next best steps? And how do they quickly get to the summary of the things that they should care about? When we think more reactive scenarios, and this is where, going back to data being the currency underneath Security Copilot, reactive information and logs, right? Also super helpful for various scenarios. And it could be for, detecting more broad spectrum attack types, right? That cut across lots of different data sets. Or it could be just in relation to doing things, post-mortem, like, threat hunting after things have happened, but still more in a proactive perspective, since, we may not know that there's something active. This is where not having to know things like KQL as an expert, using things like natural language to KQL skill set or processing through Security Copilot becomes very valuable. One, to create advanced detection rules. Two, to help with, automations. And three, to really kind of extend the capabilities of those folks that are really manning the fort on the SIM side, but in context of what they need to do specific to, potential reactive scenarios or more broad spectrum investigations. When we get to things like Intune, right, just to show an example, this is where, we can see things like data related to devices and the posture of those devices, AKA how they're configured, what policies are deployed to them, are they compliant or not, and so forth, being infused in context of what we need to understand as we are investigating things, or in regards to what are best practices, right? So in scenarios where we may not quite know what is the impact of a certain policy or configuration, right? Now we go seek that information. If we don't really understand what devices are being, let's just say, enforced under certain conditions for conditional access or in scope for certain policies, we go get that information and distill it so that we can make actionable decisions around it. So just a picture of how you can see different types of data coming into play, but very much, once again, at the core of Security Copilot is the data it can see and what it can do with that data from a reasoning perspective. I'll end here quickly, won't go into a lot of detail there, but a lot of impact. Once again, the objective is how do we save individuals time, right? Whether I'm a security analyst or an IT operations specialist that's focused on security stuff, how can you do the things that you likely do on your day-to-day job, whether it's troubleshooting, reporting, or responding to incidents faster, right? That's kind of the name of the game. And then secondly, when it comes to scenarios where we may not be an expert in the Microsoft platform and knowing everything about Defender or, XYZ tool set, this ability to leverage generative AI in a way that helps provide expertise in areas where it doesn't exist, right? But do it kind of in context and on the fly, and, as opposed to going and reading a book, right? Just go get the information that you need to go take the actions that you need to take. So from a 50,000 foot view perspective, right, the objective is ultimately to make education institutions and K-12 organizations more secure, and to do so by focusing on the areas that actually matter. And although once again, there's no silver bullet for security, we do recognize that in the world of making do with the security professionals that we have, there's a tremendous opportunity to, make those folks more efficient, but also to expand the skill sets where necessary using machines. So Security Copilot sits at the intersection of a lot of stuff. Once again, piggybacking off of Ignite, when we refer to Defender, it refers to our threat protection stack, things like Defender for Endpoint, Defender for Identity, all the good stuff. Sentinel being the SIM SOAR, Entra being the identity stack, Purview being the data security and governance stack, and Priva being for privacy management, Intune being for unified endpoint management. All of those layers represent context from a security perspective, and although they aren't necessarily just pure play security areas, that information tends to get used in lots of different ways. So an example being, when we're responding to some type of compliance audit, and we have to confirm if we are NIST 853 compliant and what controls we have into play. Here is where things like configuration management, or the view on configuration from a security risk perspective, is relevant, but also the same view on that configuration is relevant from a compliance perspective. So, you kind of get a feel for how that information is used in different ways, but depending on the intent and the way in which prompts are issued, this kind of gets us to both insights around the first party Microsoft solutions, as well as across some third party solutions via what we refer to as plugins, which we'll go into a little more detail in. And, just to kind of break it all out, once again, I know name changes in the Microsoft world, right, tend to be very, common. It's important to know that, when we do talk about these various lanes where information is collected in the environment and maybe a dashboard is used in the environment and, subsequently actions and activities need to happen, everything from the identity and access management layer, to the threat protection layer, to information protection and cloud security, and it kind of extends on, this notion that we no longer now, need to have, folks who may be experts in each of those respective lanes, but we can start to use still that information that is collected across those lanes to enrich investigations and to also speed up the mean time to detection and remediation for security events. So as we get into a brief demo here, there are a couple of experiences that exist inside of Security Copilot, one of which being our standalone experience. And this is where, think of it as going to generative AI dashboard and starting to ask questions, things like, hey, tell me about the incidents, for the last 30 days, or give me all the devices that are currently compliant in the environment and don't have, aren't in scope for conditional access policies, or, tell me if we're exposed to this particular threat that we may have in the environment. Every analyst using Security Copilot has access to Microsoft Defender Threat Intelligence, which, we'll go into a little detail here, but you have the ability to go ask Microsoft, what do we see and know about this thing? And then ultimately go take actions beyond, what you may currently be doing. As I mentioned, technically speaking, Defender Threat Intelligence is a standalone thing, at least in the Microsoft world, but it is embedded in Security Copilot. So every individual who has access to Security Copilot also has access to Defender Threat Intelligence. Why that's relevant is because we have what's referred to as a threat library, which includes threat intel profiles and common techniques and tactics leveraged by various attacker groups or threat actor groups that we track globally. And, this allows, once again, folks to get insights into, okay, if I don't know the context of who would have the ability to execute a certain attack in our environment, and I don't know what certain tools mean, right? The ability to phone a friend, get that information, go off, do great things. The last experience, or call it we'll call it the newish experience, is the embedded experience inside of M365 Defender. And this is where, think of that as a pop-out blade in a sense on the right-hand side in line of an attack sequence that allows you to get things like an incident summary, understand what entities are involved, get next best step actions for guided response, and things of that nature, all kind of in line with what we might be investigating live. So a little bit less of, hey, I want to go just understand some things about my environment, more focused on, we're already investigating something, tell us what's the next best step, and, cut to the chase, get it moving. I'll pause there in case there are any questions and we hop into the demo here, but try to speed up, and happy to open it for any questions as we get into the demo. All right, I'm going to take silence as no questions at the moment. So first and foremost, we'll just kind of walk through. We talked a little bit about the embedded experience, and won't spoil the thunder for some of the things highlighted in Ignite, but the reality being for folks that are familiar with the security.microsoft.com portal and have accessed it at least once, you have this left-hand navigation panel that exists, and in various tool sets that you may or may not use in the context of your Microsoft Defender tool set. Everything from things like Defender for Endpoint, which kind of has its own section, to Defender for Office, which is very much focused on protecting Teams and OneDrive and all email and all the good stuff. to things like Defender for Cloud Apps, which focus on protecting your SaaS applications and all that good stuff. This incidents and alerts section here at the top is where most folks might go to investigate, what's referred to as incidents or alerts. Incidents being groupings of alerts where we've already done some type of correlation and aggregation of information to package things up in an incident that might relate to multiple alerts, or what's referred to as multi-stage attacks. We'll click on that for a second here, and we'll get into just a basic example. Business email compromise for financial fraud attack. This happens to be an existing incident that was generating an environment, and a couple things I'll call out here. One of which here is the newer experience, if you will, supports this, as I mentioned, pop-out blade to the right, that allows you to do a couple things very quickly. One is get an incident summary, two, get an incident report. This incident summary gets generated by default, which just quickly highlights, hey, what's the timeline here? What is the type of attack that we've observed? Who are the key players involved? And what are some of the top entities and insights we need to glean, right? So this comes in the form of an incident summary. This little button here in the right hand is what allows us to generate an incident report, and then go and do other things with it, like send it to someone else, open it directly in Copilot, post some comments, et cetera, et cetera. But this is more so in the lines of, hey, if we need to go do something with this incident, push it to another team, open up a ServiceNow ticket or ITSM ticket, we can do that fairly quickly. But below that is what we start to get into things like, in the context of how today most folks might go and investigate incidents. Generally speaking, in this new experience, many folks may be familiar with doing things like leveraging the attack story, right? And this can be like, hey, we want to know what things happen in sequence. Let's build it out. Let's start to pay attention to kind of each thing that had happened in sequence. We might pin those and we might come back to it, but essentially we kind of want to understand what happened. Right? This is the normal flow. That still exists. It's not going anywhere. But the reality is that can take some time, right? Understanding what the steps were, what happened, who was involved, right, is normally how that's used. That can still happen today. But tomorrow, the ability to get that information and to cut to the chase is what Security Copilot brings to the table. So nothing happening with the attack story. You can still use it, all the good stuff, technically speaking, but interacting with Security Copilot to know what the recommended actions are, to know what the next best steps are, start to come into play with respect to things like guided response. Right. So, one big focus area here is two things. One, we know in most environments, there's some sequence of activities that need to take place after something has been observed and detected. Right. And typically that means, there may be tickets involved that are open. There may be different team members that get involved because certain things happen. This notion of being able to quickly determine where there are similar types of incidents, but also how we do quick confirmation of the status of this incident to then trigger other things, which once again can be opening of tickets, putting on our platform, or the opening of various other activities that need to ensue. Right, true positive, false positive, et cetera, get us moving, because now we recognize that this is something we need to actually care about. The second piece in the triage bucket, or at least below that, tends to refer to what's the next best step. Okay, we know that there may be multiple users involved. There are multiple IPs, one of which maybe is malicious. Some other actions have happened. Mailbox was compromised. Some forwarding rules were created, what have you. But oftentimes in this space, right, speed as it pertains to next best action is super important. So if we can identify patient zero and then go, stop the bleeding to buy us more time to go do other stuff, comes into play with guided response. In this case, just an example where we confirmed there was a user who was, the ultimate culprit. In this case, they were the beachhead for the activity and the environment. We may want to go reset that user's password, get them back green, force them to, to do other stuff that's necessary. But this, no additional harm can be done by this user at the moment, given, where we are in the process. So I'll call out one thing here. It comes up all the time. Security Copilot, is very much a copilot. So what does that mean? At the moment, it will not go out and nuke all the users in the environment and force all users to reset their passwords. It will not go and disable all endpoints from communicating, with the internet. It will not wreak havoc on the environment and to an extent cause operational harm. That is a very big point that we stand behind at the moment, just based on not the fact that AI itself isn't mature, but this notion that when humans coupled with AI can create dynamics where the understanding of how to use AI can still be somewhat premature. This is where our stance is. We want to make sure that humans are involved, but also we're only going to recommend things that can make sense with a high degree of confidence that it makes sense. So just a thing to call out. Although it can do everything up to, hey, if we want to conduct, we want to perform this remediation or we're going to automate this thing, how do I automate it? What remediation should I take? What are the steps I should execute in sequence? All those things can be, provided and from a Copilot perspective, but it will not go and once again nuke everything in the environment. So I will once again. I know we're about 6 minutes over into our next part of the session here, but I'll pause there in case there are any questions. I think we might have, Steve, maybe 4 to 8 minutes left. Is that accurate?
You can take as much time as you want. We're actually into the security office hours at this moment, so okay. It's all relevant at that point.
You have another 45 minutes, sir.
Oh, man.
So we do have one question here, Corey.
Okay.
The question is, when can education get access? In other words, when can EDU customers get access to Security Copilot in their tenants?
Great question. So currently at the moment, it is in what's referred to as early access program. And there's just to be super transparent, there's a short number of slots associated with who can be in the early access program. But happy to announce that education is supported to join the early access program. I can talk more about the details around the program, but as of about October 10th, education customers were essentially allowed, or they became authorized to potentially express interest in joining that program, and then subsequently, if nominated and approved, get access to that program. Hopefully that answers the question. Was that the only question, Ferdinand?
Yes, sir.
There was a comment. Yeah, Copilot for log analytics, Azure Data Explorer would be nice to build queries and visualizations with natural language.
Great call out, and unintentional byproduct of the tool. But what we quickly realized was Security Copilot is very much a training platform, even though we didn't intend for it to become that. But that's what we ended up learning, how it could and would be used. But then secondly, to the point around, being able to create queries and visualizations, one of the top use cases that we've seen is what can be done very quickly to create, as an example, workbooks inside of Sentinel. We've seen a couple scenarios where a lot of folks are, crafting very complex workbooks with lots of visualizations that map to different scenarios that they use for like daily, I guess I don't call it daily reports, but more like daily operations, such that, we've seen those types of reports get created in as little as like 10 to 15 minutes, just by being able to know, what types of visualizations they want to create, like, bar chart, pie chart, et cetera. But more importantly, the underlying queries that go into building those visualizations being able to be created extremely quickly, right? So, if we have lots of tables that we're connecting together and we need to parse those tables, and, historically, you might have to build your own parser and then, understand what the schema looks like. And then, these things could take weeks, but we're seeing them take, in some cases, minutes, hours. if we know what we're trying to do. So I think on the reporting side, there's a huge, we'll call it value add on behalf of just how to quickly create dashboards, but under the hood, also how to, use those underlying queries for those dashboards to also like be used in things like analytics rules or like, routine. We've seen some scenarios around routine email alerts being created based on the rules that were designed that now kind of translate to like, operational alerts. So there's definitely a huge space there for ADX, which under the, ADX uses KQL. So pretty much anything you can use in, Sentinel or ADX or Defender, all of it uses KQL. So they can kind of reuse the same types of queries. Any other questions?
No, nothing appears to be that. I'm probably going to stop recording in a moment just because we are moving into the security office hours portion.
Okay. I think one hand might have got raised. John Lee.
Oh, yes. Yep, John. John is one of our regulars for the office hours. So
I heard
really?
that,
Okay.
by the way. I heard that voice. Oh, yes, John. So it actually does involve a question that I had asked at our last security office hours. So it really is kind of dovetailing into the security office hours topic. But one of the challenges that we face is in automated remediations, which is, I suppose, the less GUI friendly version of the security copilot you're describing. Security copilot looks like it just kind of makes it more like a click the balloons thing, whereas automatic remediations is a little bit more fire and forget. The struggle we have with automatic remediations is that we really do want to be able to do a lot of automated remediations. But it appears from what we've seen so far that we don't have a lot of ability to control which types of remediations to automatically say yes to and which types of remediations to not automatically say yes to. So we're fine with files being automatically quarantined, with things automatically being deleted at the file system level. We're fine with processes automatically being blocked. What we don't want is emails, essentially, being automatically soft deleted out of inboxes. And that seems to be a very frequent automated remediation suggestion. And so our hope at our organization is to be able to have automatic remediation of everything that isn't deleting an email, just because we seem to have a really high false positive rate due to specific organizational quirks. Does that make sense? Is that something you think that might be a feature of Security Copilot? Or are we going to be able to kind of say like, yes, please automatically do these things, but no, please do not automatically do those things?
Yeah, so great question, and I'll take a step back for a second because I just want to make sure I fully understand, the scenario at hand. And when you say automatic remediations, I'll reshare my screen. Are you referring to things that would happen through automatic attack disruption through M365 Defender?
Yes, it's in the security console. Yeah.
Okay. So I'll just take that as an example. Technically speaking, automatic attack disruption like operates in parallel to Security Copilot. So, the things that are instrumented as part of, attack disruption, are viewed as high fidelity actions that should be taken when we've observed a thing. Now, two things you've called out. One is kind of, hey, we're seeing a false positive rate there. And then secondly, there may be certain actions that we want to, we want them to be global, and in others we don't. There is some configuration available, for tuning attack disruption, but to your point, there's not a lot that's configurable. And most of that is because, at least for the things that are in scope for that, it is tied to things that we know need to happen. Now, there's also automated investigation and response, or AIR, right, which also has the ability to be invoked as an automatic remediation thing. There's a bit more configuration there, right? And typically speaking, this is where things like soft deletion of emails and quarantining of devices and other things may come into play, whether it be from Defender for Endpoint or Defender for Office. When Security Copilot is alongside of that, the thing that can happen is you have the ability to understand what are those configurable options, right? So if you're not an expert on the thing today and you don't know how attack disruption is configured, or you don't know what options exist in air, right? What Security Copilot can do is help you understand what are the options that make sense to do what you're trying to do. So if it's, hey, we want to soft delete emails, but we don't want to quarantine devices, then this is where orchestration of the configuration comes into play. But in terms of like using Security Copilot to go, like let me take a step back. In its guided response, right? So what it refers to as remediation or guided response, there are a set of kind of guided remediations that it will recommend. Once again, it requires you to, click them to enforce them to do it. But once again, it sits alongside of attack disruption. And typically these are things that are going to be more point focused based on what you're investigating. It's not like, hey, this is our routine automation that's configured to always do this when we have this scenario. Although that could be configured, that's not kind of how it's set up by default.
Okay, thanks for the clarification.
No problem.
So Corey, on that note, with the new integration stuff that was announced around Ignite between Sentinel and the Microsoft Defender XDR portal, because people hadn't realized we changed the name of the Microsoft 365 Defender portal to the Microsoft Defender XDR portal. Mm-hmm. Would they be able to at least have the ability of creating a runbook so they could kick off that automation, but directly from the console itself?
So if I understand you correctly, so yes and no, meaning yes being a lot of their run books in the platform, we're talking like, Sentinel or Defender, underneath them, it's all KQL. So, the ability to, hey, we've observed this. We want to create a run book that, automates this detection or automates this particular type of remediation. It will go and generate, the KQL for you, or the KQL plus the configuration for the run book, such that, you just have to go take it and implement it. If that's kind of where you're going, like that's kind of the way it works at the moment. That's helpful. And I know we talked about it briefly. I'll just show it because I think it's helpful. But, in the standalone experience, the flip side here is, we briefly talked about it, but this notion of prompt books and prompts, which, do a lot of things in regards to, I think I mentioned the vulnerability impact assessment, which, when you think of prompt books, right, think of it as a series of things that you can go and understand about something in sequence based on what an expert would do in that scenario, right? So in this example, from doing vulnerability impact analysis, an example prompt book might be, hey, we're going to summarize the CVE. We're going to talk about the technology susceptible to it. We're going to, provide any insight regarding TI that shows how this CVE is exploitable, and then, where it can be exploitable, and then get to more details around what we can do about this CVE, what it would impact in the environment, and then subsequently, like, turn it into a dashboard or a report that can be used, right? So that's one example in the prompt book. The second piece is this notion of plugins. So, think of this as, this functionality allows us to reason over more data where it lives, right? And that's, this allows us to do, generate data insights, but it also allows us to create context around skills that might need to be invoked for understanding what to do with certain types of data, right? So once again, maybe not everyone is an expert in knowing how to interact with threat intel, but you don't need to be, because, technically speaking, we can reason over threat intel, but we can also bring to the table threat intelligence skill sets to help you understand what to focus on, like what to care about. So these are some core functionality, capabilities associated with Security Copilot. I won't, once again, walk through all of this. I think Dane might have come off of mute, but there are scenarios around how do you ask questions, right? Prompt engineering. And, one scenario might be, we have interesting users, we got sensitive users, we got an admin user. We suspect things might be going on. let's go and figure out what can we find out about this user. We'll use Lynn as an example. You know, how this works in the context of plugins and things of nature is we will, under the hood, we're using the Loma model to kind of instrument different types of data sets, normalize the data across them, invoke skill sets that are relevant to the context of the thing. In this case, we're interpreting that this is an identity focused thing. And then we need to go and do identity focused stuff, right? At which point, you know, we get some basic information on Lynn, who, you know, for all intents and purposes, that information is going to be used to help us pivot, right? So, you know, information about Lynn's account and, you know, their key identifiers, GUIDs, all the good stuff, and then the status of their account. Now, you know, prompts go as far as like how you want to take them. And this comes into like, do we know what to ask next, right? Or do we know what to care about? Oftentimes, like if we're looking at something like a SIM, this may be, hey, well, we know what table that is. We know we want to go look at the login events. We're going to go invoke the login events table. And hopefully we know if it's a interactive login versus a non-interactive login and where that is. In this case, we don't really need to know that. We could just simply say, give me all the login attempts. We know this account was disabled at some point, but, you know, we need to get to a certain day and the login attempts for this user. You know, another example of where, yes, technically speaking, is this very different than like writing a query ourselves and instrumenting it? No, but in the spirit of like when we have junior people who don't really know table formats and the schema and they're not an expert in KQL, you know, this type of query could easily be, you know, 5 to 8 lines with some concatenation that, you know, can take a day or longer to build if you don't quite know what you're doing. So in this particular scenario, we're just getting more information about, you know, the user, their login attempts. We don't have to be an expert in login codes and, hey, was it this failed login code, you know, and so forth, and we missed one. We're just going to essentially get all of them and then, you know, spit back the information regarding what were the login attempts. And I'm seeing slightly more time than normal being used there, but we'll go with it. So, you know, here we'll just peruse the information a little bit in regards to, you know, we have a high level on, you know, where we pull the data from, what the GUID is, what the timestamps are, which applications, for anyone that's familiar with, you know, looking at the logs in conditional access or inside of, you know, Entra ID, right? You'll see certain things like this to include things like, you know, what was the actual user agent string, which can refer to device, you know, what was the actual status of the login. But this just kind of puts it in, I would say, a little bit of a different view. As you may quickly see, you know, oftentimes we may not always know where is conditional access being enforced, right? You know, but we know there was a successful login, but because conditional access is enforced after, you know, we'll call it the credential has actually been passed along and successfully validated, the two kind of go hand in hand. So it's not just this, you know, let's see if the login was successful. We need to see if access was also successful. So once again, brief example of, okay, we see, you know, some CA policies were enforced. You know, we had this one was successful and it was for MFA. We have some others that didn't apply. And then we also know that, you know, there were a few applications that were spread out across where they might have accessed them from. You know, a little bit of Virginia, some Paris. Paris seems a little odd. Not sure why we're coming from Paris, but, you know, could be an anomaly. At this point, you know, oftentimes there's a conversation of, well, you know, we see some information that makes us feel like there's something we should investigate further. This is typically where, for anyone familiar with things like identity protection, right, you know, risk signals around, hey, is the sign-in risk? Is there a user risk? You know, but oftentimes we may not know, like, what does the risk mean, right? Okay, we had an alert, someone closed it, or it said, you know, atypical travel, what have you. Here is where, you know, this notion of being able to get to the evidence around where there's risk and why is kind of could be a next step, right? It's not always technically, you know, doesn't have to be that way, right? Everyone may have a different workflow, but in the spirit of triage, this can be a next step that makes a lot of sense because, you know, we see some things that are a little bit off, right? At which point, this is where interacting with Copilot, interacting with the threat intelligence come into play to include, you know, hey, you know, well, there may be an alert that was triggered somewhere related to the user being at risk. We want to know kind of why they were at risk, and we want to dive into more detail of when that would have happened and some of the surrounding details, right? I won't, once again, bleed that and go into a lot of additional information on that front, but the reality is this tends to relate to potentially different scenarios around, okay, do we have alerts? Maybe yes. Do we have other signal that we would want to correlate that with? Maybe yes. Or we want to pivot to, all right, we have some understanding of how the users operate in the environment. This means we typically see users doing these things. We believe that the reason, like how they do these things in sequence typically creates false positives. Okay, well, now the opportunity to say, we potentially want to go and look to see, do we have this, quote unquote, what we've observed, this activity more common, right, across the environment. Typically, it's going to refer to us like writing our own query. Where do we see different types of users doing this activity and across the entire spectrum? But just kind of getting into the spirit of taking what we learn and then instrumenting, or we'll call it pivoting, into things like hunting now comes into play. At which point, you may not exactly know what you want to do. This is where things like the threat hunting skill set can recommend things for you, or you can simply give it what you want. In this case, I'm just gonna poke through a few of the examples around hey, there could be, are there any other Defender incidents involving Lynn in this time frame? Showing these types of scenarios in the environment. Each of these elements, right, timestamp, severity, techniques, categories indicate, we'll call it signal that we may want to use to go look for this information. And this under the hood is kind of writing a query, but it is more or less, we're writing it based off of asking it natural language versus, going and just writing it, right? In other examples, we may get a little more elaborate, right, which could be, we want to get super involved. We want to understand the underlying, like copy these queries out and then use them for scenarios. So we can ask for it to, hey, give us the query that we want to use. We want it to be in the format that allows us to build an analytics rule. We want to run this, every hour on the hour, right? At which point now, we've kind of pivoted to another scenario. But I'll just briefly, kind of execute, this in the spirit of kind of getting a feel for what does it mean to leverage and to what do the results typically look like when we're doing something like that. So you can get a feel for it, which in this case, you should see the output shown as we're invoking, the natural language to Defender KQL skill. We're then using the prompt itself to take that content and then put it in a format that can build an operationally effective query, understanding the right tables it wants to look at, and then do two things. One, present you with, and this is where evidence comes into play, right? So in Security Copilot, a lot of we do is tied to, can we confirm that there's evidence on how we came to a conclusion on a thing, which helps with, once again, hallucinations and grounding the data. Secondly, to help folks learn. So in this case, we could just simply provide you with the results, which allows you to export it, send it to someone else, et cetera. But we're also providing with the query. If you want to use it yourself in another place for other reasons, you can do that. So kind of twofold in regards to, here's the content that you can leverage, in the spirit of what you may do day to day. So, you can kind of get a feel. Once again, I won't necessarily, belabor this, but a few other features I didn't quite talk about. One is this notion of a pin board, which I don't think I can do it at the moment in this one. Actually, maybe I can. But this notion that, hey, I've been investigating a thing. I have other folks on the team. I want to share it with them, or I want to track what I've been doing and track what they've been doing. This feature set referred to as a pin board kind of allows you to collaborate with other folks, see what types of, queries and results they're issuing. Use those to create a superset of information that you may use to turn into a report, or just simply to kind of, piggyback off of each other in terms of what you're doing. And then lastly, this sharing functionality, which once again, assuming we've done what we needed to do, generate a report, want to go send it out to someone via email, we can do that, or export it and then share it out in some other way. In a nutshell, this is kind of the standalone experience inside of Security Copilot, just a glimpse into how it works, what it looks like, and how it may be leveraged in the context of some common use cases. So I know we are close to time, and I'll just check to see if there are any questions. Looking at the chat, I don't see any questions at the moment, but I'll pause because I know we had other content to cover in case we had any parting words or questions before we move on. All right. Well, thanks for the time here today. And with that, I'll pass it back over to you, Steve, and the team for the next topic.
All right. Thank you very much.
Q&A.
Yeah. Yep. We're going to turn it over to open Q&A because I don't think Monica's with us.
No, she did have to drop. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. No worries. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording at this point. And for those of us that are, or for those of you that are not normally at the security office hours, basically we would normally